With the right attitude and with the right motivation, and by mobilizing the right people, even as a young person, one could create change.
Hello and welcome to Up Close and Personal Season 2 at InvokED Studio. I'm your host Pavitra, and today we have Bonnici with us here. We are going to have conversations around leadership, collective action, and education equity today. Welcome to the show. It's a delight to have you over here.
Thank you, Pavitra. Good to be here.
Yes. I know you have done so many things, but here's a quick attempt to a brief introduction. Dr. Bonnici is the director of Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship and head of social innovation at the World Economic Forum. A public health physician and social change leader, he was previously the founding director of the Bertha Center for Social Innovation. It's a great opportunity to have this conversation with you here today.
Thank you.
You have worked with so many leaders across the world. I just want to know what keeps you motivated in this sector and to inspire so many as well.
It's been a great privilege to kind of meet so many social change leaders in the education sector and beyond. Coming from being a physician, coming from being a doctor, I'm from South Africa, and I grew up through the HIV pandemic, and it was a very challenging time. What I recognized and learned very quickly that the well-being of human beings is not only about being free of disease. It was really a much more holistic well-being, and what really brought me into the sector looking at social change and particularly social innovation, which is really the process of how change happens. It's not just about what change we want, but how do we get to that change, is really about leadership. And it's about purposeful leadership and values-based leadership. And that for me has been such an inspiring and positive journey of hope at a time when I think I had points in my career where I had lost hope and was quite pessimistic about the changes and what changes were needed. And so this journey for me personally has been about how do I support and work with leaders that have the vision for change, but need often resources, they need support, they need network, they need encouragement, they need visibility, they need growth. And so that's been the privilege of my journey, and what we do at the Schwab Foundation and the World Economic Forum is to really uplift leaders who are creating new pathways for change to ensure that we can help accelerate that.
Right. I totally understand the perspective that you're coming from. And I'd like to know a little more. What do you think, who is a leader?
Who is a leader? What makes a leader?
That's
a really good question. I think I was very lucky, again, early in my career to recognize you don't need to be the Minister of Education to change education.
Right.
And I had that, I was given this opportunity to show agency, to feel like I could do something. I was 23, I was working in Namibia and had the opportunity to write the policy for newborn healthcare in the country, and recognized, okay, I was a nobody essentially, but with the right attitude and with the right motivation, and by mobilizing the right people, even as a young person, one could create change. So I think quite early on, I had that flavor that I didn't have to wait, and we don't have to wait. That the leader can be anyone in an organization. It can be, of course, the person with the formal authority, but actually leadership, especially when it's not coming from formal authority, can come from so many other places. It can come from students inside an education system. It can come from families. It can come from even the janitor or the cleaner of the school, where we can see, how both ideas can be brought forward, but also values can be set. And I think leadership, for me, is very much about values and integrity and a commitment to change, and less about the ego of leadership that we often see in the world and in the political world.
That's a really good perspective on leadership, and I really agree with you totally. And building on to that, you mentioned about how leadership can be seen even in children. What is your point of view on whether a leader is born or a leader is made?
Wow. I'll have to say leaders can be made, I think, because I think the potential lies in everyone. And I think we mustn't get caught up in thinking that leadership is one person's job, right? And that it is actually a collective effort, and that instilling opportunities, particularly in young people, to try and to fail and to feel like their voice, and their ideas matter, and that genuinely we're listening to those ideas and actually finding ways to use them, means that we can really mobilize a movement of leaders. And I think that's what the world needs. If we're looking at one person for the answers, then we're going to be left behind. And I think we see that in the world, and I see the biggest changes in the world have always been through mass movements, right? And so I think we can see all around the world people thinking about how we transform education, but when it's coming top down from single or small groups of policymakers, we're often not getting the right results.
Right. And when you speak about collective action and how we need multiple people coming together for a movement to go on, I'd like to ask you, when there are different mindsets coming together, how do you see collective action going forward towards the movement that we are aiming for?
Yeah, it's an interesting time where we're focusing more on collectives, and I think we've got to this place because, first of all, the challenges we face and the things we're trying to transform are quite complex, right? They're large systems, they're to do with young people's lives that are spanning over long time periods, and also they're sometimes quite stuck in old ways, right?
Yes.
And I think we've got to this point of focusing on collectives because we know that single organizations have not been able to solve that complexity or deal with all of the challenges in that system, or have all the expertise at every point in the system, or the ability to shift. So I think we've got here as a result of almost focusing too much on what single organizations can do, or single leaders can do, or single decision makers can do, and we've got to this point of recognizing that actually collective work is thinking about how we do collective work is what we're focusing on. I think, collective work has happened for thousands of years, and India is a fantastic example of that in so many ways. But now I think we've so much focused on what is the new technology that's going to change, education. And we've been so focused that the innovation is on the technology or the curriculum or, the right model that's going to work. And I think actually the innovation is how we work together. So actually the reason to focus on collectives is to understand how we do that better. So the 21st century challenge really for me is not, what is the technology that's going to bring us forward, but really how we work together under some common goals. And I think focusing now on, what is the process of building collective work, right, towards those outcomes is what we're really learning about here in InvokED and in other spaces.
Yeah, and I think that brings to my next question as well. I believe Schwab Foundation and the festive that you have once a year, if I'm not wrong, it brings so many leaders across the world together. What do you think is the power of such spaces?
Yeah, so the Schwab Foundation is the sister organization of the World Economic Forum, which is a large international organization based in Switzerland. It's been around for 55 years, and it brings in its annual meeting world leaders together in a small Swiss town called Davos, which you may have heard of. It's a small town, but it gets a lot of attention in January during our annual meeting. We have 3,000 leaders, 60 heads of state, 300 ministers, 1,000 CEOs and chairmen. It really is one of the most intense gathering of leaders from public, private, and civil society sector all in one place. So it's the importance, I guess, of convening right now in the world, I think, is dialogue. We're at a point where the world is becoming a bit more polarized. We're a little bit less tolerant of different ideas and different positions, whether political, whether religious, whether societal beliefs. And I think now even more than ever, bringing people together in person to be able to develop understanding, to develop tolerance, to develop mutual respect, but also then to work together and find the ways to work together, I think, is a critical moment. So we obviously do that as part of our core work, and we bring social change leaders into those spaces to connect with senior government and business leaders. So they also get an understanding of what are the changes on the ground. And I think we see kind of social innovators as a really important bridge between the issues facing young people, facing communities, and the kind of global economic agenda, and really, being a connection point. And of course, today we're bringing together all these education leaders here in India, and I think that serves the same purpose.
Right. And I think, like we mentioned earlier, there are different mindsets coming together, and I think it inspires each other as well in such spaces.
Yeah.
Right. Are there any challenges that you see that people bring in spaces like this, which maybe have to be addressed by you or their own peers?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all come together to learn, because we have challenges every day in our work, and I think, as you said, we're bringing different mindsets, and if that's a mindset of learning, hopefully people get to take away different approaches to some of those challenges, but we also get to share and get a better understanding of what some of those challenges even are, because I think all of us are seeing, as they say, like part of the elephant. I'm seeing the trunk, you're seeing the tail, someone else is seeing the legs, and I think that's important to accept that, understand these different parts of that system, and what the challenge actually. So a better understanding of the challenge, I think, is the first one, and then obviously thinking how we might work out ways to deal with that together. But then, of course, there are different points of view, and then there are points of conflict and tension, and we need to acknowledge that as well, because they're different, sometimes competing, and sometimes interests that, where there is a trade-off to make.
Yeah.
And so I think having, even more reason to bring people together, even if they don't necessarily get on, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's even more important now than only having a gathering of people that all think the same way. So I think being able to bring these different stakeholders together is critical, because what's in the mind of a government policymaker or district school officer is quite different to what's in the mind of a parent about what they want as outcomes.
Definitely.
But I think being able to understand that will hopefully lead us to some better positions, and then particularly to inform those that are working in collectives to then say, where are then the meeting points between them.
Yeah. I really like the example that you used to make this point of that of an elephant. And maybe I'm going to switch gears a little bit over here. You have mentioned in one of your talks about organizational scale versus systemic scale.
Yes.
Could you shed a little more light on that for our viewers?
Sure. So I think we've been obsessed about, organizational scale, which is let's build large organizations that can reach many, many people. And I think that's sometimes conflated or confused with systemic scale, which is really about, changing the system and having an impact, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a large organization to do that. And I think we've been quite obsessed about building organizations and then wondering why they don't scale, and saying, okay, here's a model that works in Karnataka state. Why doesn't that, we can spread this around to every other state, and it doesn't happen because the context is different, the people are different, and that slightly different models will be needed. It's so this idea of let's take a blueprint and get one organization to roll it out. We've been so seduced by that idea that that's always going to work, and yet surprised why it so often doesn't work. And so really then thinking that systemic scale might need different approaches. It's not to say that you don't always, that it's not the same thing, but we've been focused now on, smaller organizations that, because of their work to leverage others, to network with others, to build coalitions, to influence policymakers, have been able to reach, a larger scale. And I think there's a great quote by Margaret Mead that said, never doubt that a small group of people can change the world. It's often the only thing that ever has.
Right.
So I do think we mustn't always confuse that the more systemic changes we're looking for have to be achieved by very, very large organizations.
Yeah, that's really a very nice perspective to have. And I think even in our organizations, when we have dialogues around scale, these are some lenses that we keep as well. And it's really nice to know that this perspective as well. I think we'll go back in time a little bit and speak about your school days.
Oh, wow.
Okay. How were you at school?
How was I at school? I was quite a diligent student.
Okay.
Yeah, I think only in my later years that I say I should have had more fun when I was at school. Yeah. No, I had fun. I was very privileged to go to. I actually went to, probably like in India and South Africa, we had quite colonial history, and so kind of quite English schooling. I didn't enjoy school very much. It was like an all-boys traditional English school, and I didn't really fit in.
Right.
I was quite focused on my studies, and so that's kind of where I focused my energies. But it wasn't an experience that I felt, allowed me to express more of who I was, or one had to conform rather than explore.
Yeah.
Right. And a fair amount of rote learning. But I also had some amazing teachers along the way, and those are the ones that inspired you and made you realize different things were possible.
Right.
And so those are always the ones that that give you dreams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any teacher in particular you have in mind right now who really inspired you?
Yeah, I had an interesting teacher. I mean, he didn't last long in the education system, but he tried to implement. I think I don't know if you're aware of the magnet schools, which are kind of a different way of learning. And in quite a traditional school, try to bring like a multi-grade classroom together, which was not the case in everything else is you've got 3, 4, 5, and he brought together these grade 4 and 5, and tried to institute a very different way of learning, which followed a topic. And so if you were learning about ancient Egypt, you would learn about mathematics, biology, all related to that historical time and context. And so it was really an integrated way of learning. I was very fortunate for 2 years in that classroom to have a very different experience, and I think that made a huge difference in my life.
That's really nice. Yeah. Here in Karnataka, we have something called Nali Gali, which comes out with the same concept.
Fantastic.
Is there something from now that you wish you had during your school days?
I think a lot more diversity in the school itself. I think an opportunity to also explore learning that didn't necessarily have exams as very clear outcomes, and be able to explore things that I was interested in at the time. So but I can't complain. I had a good education, and it clearly set me up well for life. But I did use time after school to then go back and start explore in my later studies things that I think I was more interested in.
Yeah, I resonate with that thought. Okay, so we can move on to the next segment if that's okay.
Good.
So we have a few jars over here with some topics written. If you could pick any one jar and read out the question that you picked.
Okay, movement that shaped the world, the jar of inspiration, offbeat and curious. Let's go with that. It's early morning, so I can open it?
Sure, yeah. Please read it out for our audience.
All right, and the winner is? The question is, if you could switch jobs with anyone for a day, who would it be and why? Wow.
That's an interesting question.
It's a great question. If I could switch jobs with anyone for a day. I feel pretty lucky, actually. but to be honest, because I'm so inspired by the people I meet and these social change leaders. Often many of them I'm like, I want to come and work with you for a day. So that's actually something I feel quite often. But let me pick someone specific for you. So there is actually a group that work in the Amazon that bring together 30 indigenous tribes to talk about building a positive bioeconomy for the future of the Amazon. And the problem with the Amazon, of course, there's deforestation, there's exploitation, and a lot of that, that the indigenous communities, they are often on the back foot trying to resist all of these encroachments. And this group have come together and said, rather than being in the defensive mode, why aren't we in the proactive mode about creating a positive economy that's going to be an alternative to these? And I would love to sit in, they have gatherings of 50 indigenous leaders together, and they mix that with technology leaders, with investors, with business leaders to think about, well, how can they actually create a positive economy that can also be influence and support the people. And I just think being in that space for a day would be extremely interesting.
That sounds really interesting.
The group are called the Amazon Sacred Headwaters, and it's about this very special place in the Amazon. So I've not been to visit, but I would love to spend a day there.
I think it's a good point for us, our viewers as well, to look up and see what the work they're doing. And it's really nice to hear that from you as well. While wrapping up this conversation, my last question for you is, what is one hope you see for the future of the world or for education?
Sure, one hope. Well, given I have children, this is a very, very real one. I really hope that children continue to have dreams, positive dreams about the future. I think we're going into some quite challenging times in the world, and I think young people see the future they're inheriting with quite a lot of concern. But I think we need to have this positive, constructive mindset.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is if we have a pessimistic mindset, we're likely to become more individualistic, because you don't then, if you become cynical that things are going to work out for us as a whole, so you're going to look after yourself.
Yeah.
And I think if we have a positive, constructive mindset about the future, recognizing that there are challenges, we're more likely to build that future if we have that right mindset. So that's really my hope for all the young people and for all of us, that we can take that kind of constructive optimism as something we hold, that we can vision this positive future and then build it.
That's really a powerful thought, and I hope every child looks at that as well. With this, we have come to the end of our episode.
Thank you.
I really thank you for sharing your experiences, insights, and wisdom with us. And stay connected, keep the dialogue going, and we will see you at the next episode.